Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josephine Watson, Commercial Project Editor at iGaming Business, and I'll be chairing today's IGB webinar. We're delighted to be hosting a webinar with WorldPay today, discussing how to power your payments. WorldPay asks players across 9 countries about their online payment habits and preferences to help empower companies attract, convert, and build customer loyalty. Power Your Payments shines light on how players want to pay. We'll be covering themes such as user behaviours, regional differences, balancing convenience and security, payment preferences, removing friction in the payment journey. Our panel will introduce themselves fully shortly, but before that, I'd like to remind our audiences that, as always, we'll be hosting a Q&A session following the presentation. So please do submit the questions as we go along via the Q&A portal, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible in the allocated time. With that, I'm going to go pass over to the WorldPay team, so fire away, guys.
Thanks, Josie. Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is James Tiltman, and I'm the VP of our vertical growth team here at WorldPay. With me today, I've got Greg Goldstein, who's one of our lead gaming strategists on the team, and also Alex Suckling, who's one of our senior relationship managers for our EMEA gaming commercial team, who supports some of the largest names in the gambling world. Excuse me, there we go. Before we start, just introduce you to WorldPay. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the brand, but for those of you who aren't, just a brief overview. We're obviously a very global organization with offices and staff across the world. We process in 146 countries and cover 126 different currencies, and we're adding to that all the time. Gaming is very much a key focus industry for us, and it has been ever since WorldPay onboarded our first operator back in 1998. So we've got a long history in the vertical, and over that time we've really developed a very talented and knowledgeable team to support the operators. And as part of that engagement and high level of support, we're always attending and present at all the major events and trade shows, and we pride ourselves on delivering unique content and tailored to the industry. Which really leads me into why we're here today and talk about Power Your Payments as a piece of content. So Power Your Payments is a really exciting research campaign commissioned by ourselves and compiles the digital payment experiences and preferences across 33,000 consumers across 12 countries around the world and across 14 different industries. Now, the gaming report is a subset of a broader set of those results, which covers 9 countries out of the 12. We've asked very specific questions of gaming consumers and players that allow us to provide some unique insight into the gaming industry. The gaming report explores and analyzes how punters want to pay online and their preferences across those markets, which is key to remember in this research. It's asking punters for their preferences and doesn't necessarily reflect how it is in reality. As a result, we believe the report provides some unique insight into for operators to consider in order to attract new players and build their reputation. Optimizing payment experience and balancing convenience and security all helps drive loyalty. So over the course of the session, we're going to talk you through some of the key findings and highlights from Power Your Payments gaming report and highlight how payments can really impact player behavior. So on that note, I'm going to pass across to Greg, who's going to talk to you a little bit about player behavior.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for that, James. So for the next few minutes, we'll focus on player behavior, the importance of this in relation to the customer experience and the customer lifecycle, and how behavior and payments are intrinsically linked in the gaming space. So if you can skip one on, please, James. So players stick to their preferred gaming operators. So there's no greater qualification of behavior in gaming than loyalty and preference in choosing an operator. So with cost per acquisition, CPA being so high in the industry and being such a key metric for operators, customer elasticity and stickiness, for lack of a better word, is so important. So enticing a player to your platform is obviously the first hurdle here. But then the real battle begins. How do you make sure your platform is the platform of choice? And as we'll see in the following slides, payments plays a really pivotal role here. So the data from our report is really interesting on this one. So most players will actively use 2 or 3 gaming sites and gaming apps, with the outlier here being the very nascent US market, where it's even more important for operators to maximize the customer experience at such an early stage in the customer life cycle, especially in the newer jurisdictions as well, such as Colorado, which only very recently opened up. So with so much choice in the market for so many players, and I suppose little tangible difference up front for the player, retention is crucial. And as we'll see throughout this report, payments is one of the most important methods of locking down customer retention. So before we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to kind of relay the point that eradicating all the negative experiences and eradicating unnecessary friction is key. With the general population, with us human beings, much more likely to tell friends about a negative experience rather than a positive experience. And with such a large level of competition in the industry, you need to make sure that all impactful customer touch points are positive interactions. And while the data shows that players may have 2 or 3 active gaming apps that they use, preference will largely lie with one operator. And the challenge here is being the operator of choice. So, thanks, James. So what are the important factors in becoming the operator of choice? Well, although a few key themes stand out, geographical and regional distinctions and geographical differentiation plays a really huge role here. So players want a tailored experience that suits their individual wants and their individual needs. And this cannot be stressed enough when talking about payments and the payments experience in this space. So as you can see from the data in our report, reputation is incredibly important to players. And is the #1 reason that players select a certain operator in 5 of the 9 countries we surveyed. And how is reputation built? Well, ultimately, reputation is built from consistently strong customer experiences. This means that the payments experience must be consistently great and tailored for all players. Looking at other key factors here, ease of use and convenience also revolves around the payments experience. For example, can I use my preferred payment method? How streamlined, how frictionless is my payments journey? How swift is the payouts process? These are all key potential customer pain points that through their behavior will shape the way that they interact or don't interact with a certain operator. And as the previous slide showed and what we've just discussed, once you've lost a customer, it's incredibly hard to win them back. What I find most interesting about this data is that I think there's a perception that offering, especially in nascent markets, that there's a perception that offering the best odds is paramount to winning over the customer. But interestingly, our Power Your Payments report actually shows that this just isn't correct. Only 1 in 10 respondents said that getting the best odds was the most important factor in selecting an operator. Can you move on, please, James? Thanks. So how do punters usually use their winnings? So I suppose having an appreciation of player behavior following a winning bet is crucial in building and deploying a successful customer experience strategy that's built around payments. So the data here shows why consideration of payouts and having a faster payout method is crucial in the operator battleground. So, we don't have a crystal ball. It's very hard to preempt what players will do with their winnings. But although it's all about giving them the flexibility to decide what they want to do, that is vital here. And this is when the real consideration must be given to all payout options and those that streamline the end-to-end payment experience for the punter. This is what players remember. Typically, you will remember the first and the last interaction you've had as a consumer experience. So it's a key driver of the overall customer experience and a key way of, I suppose, elongating the customer lifecycle. So with that, we've had a pretty quick run through of player behavior, the link between payments and player behavior. So now we'll focus on how payments plays a key role in managing player expectations. So Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Greg. So my name's Alex Suckling. I'm Senior Relationship Manager at WorldPay from the Gaming and Trading team in EMEA, and I've been working in this market for the last 4 years or so. And it's a great pleasure to be able to speak with you all today and have the opportunity to hopefully give you some insights which you'll be able to bring into your player journeys and ultimately create customer loyalty. So the main things that I want to talk about are the preferred payment method and how you would use that preferred payment method in each market to make sure that your customer experience is as good and as smooth as possible for those customers and ultimately trusted. What happens if you don't use those payment methods and the preferred payment methods in those markets? The role that speed plays in actually withdrawing funds for the players, And then finally, talking about risk and people's perception of fraud and risk, and some of the changes that are coming up in the EEA region next year. So, James, if you want to move on. So, looking at our research of preferred payment methods in the 9 markets, you can see when you look at the face of the data that PayPal, credit card, and debit card make up generally the top 3 of most markets. But that split is often quite different when you get below those actual payment methods, and then when you look between each specific market itself. If we take Spain, for example, Spain with PayPal, debit card, and credit card makes up about 96% of the payment market, or the preferred payment method in that market. Whereas when you look at Germany, which you would see as potentially as a comparable European market, it only makes up about 76%, with debit card only being 1% of the preferred payment method in that market. It's worth bearing in mind that when we are looking at this data, we are talking about the preferred payment method. And in reality, we know as a payments provider, and our operators know, that this often isn't reflected in the reality. If we take the UK, for example, this research suggests that PayPal is the most preferred method in the UK market, followed by a bank transfer. And in reality, we see that debit cards often dominates up to 80 or 90% of the market in the UK. So although the preferred payment method might differ, what's actually on offer sometimes doesn't reflect the preferred payment method. But it might be an opportunity for you to look at what you're offering in each of these markets and see if there's something that your players would actually prefer, to make sure that they're coming back and staying loyal to you as an operator. I suppose the next...
Sorry.
Go on, James.
Sorry, Alex. I think the what's good to point out here, as you said, there's a delta between reality and what we're seeing here as a player preference. And I think, as you said, there's an opportunity there, I think, to potentially address consumer expectation. And it's probably worth pointing out that WorldPay, one of our other pieces of content, is the Global Payments Report, which details actually more about what payments are actually being utilized in market. So it's good to kind of compare this data against that to see where those deltas are, and potentially where you could build a gap with consumer expectation, right?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because the reality is that I think if you offered a bank transfer method in the UK, I'm not sure how well received that might be on the face of it in the initial deposit journey for an existing customer, because they're so used to using a debit card. I think it'd be a little bit shocking, but that doesn't mean that people aren't open to that as a potential offering. So yeah, comparing those 2 bits of data is really interesting. You find out some strange things that you might not have automatically just assumed. And that's what this data is really good at showing, is you probably make assumptions that, you know, these payment methods are the majority of these markets, but ultimately when you get into the data, there's probably some incremental gains, and maybe some larger gains, that you can actually take away from offering something different in that market.
Sure.
So James, if we move on to the next slide, I suppose the big question is, what happens if you don't actually offer that preferred payment method in a specific market? Now, our research suggests that 27% of players would actually drop out of the transaction. And that is quite telling when we're talking about a single preferred payment method. If that single method isn't available to that customer, a 27% of chance of them dropping out is massive to you as a business, especially when its cost of acquisition of new customers is so high. But interestingly, we see that change when we look at specific markets. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see that on the right-hand side, the chance of somebody dropping out of a transaction is much higher in the UK, Germany, and Brazil than it is in some of the other markets. The dropout rate is generally around 20%, but in the UK, if you don't offer the preferred payment method in that market, 37% of respondents said that they would drop out of the transaction. And that's a massive percentage of new customers that could potentially leave if you're not offering that preferred payment method. And I think it's quite easy to suggest that in the UK, you know, the preferred payment method you would expect would be a debit card or PayPal. So if you weren't offering one of those, the likelihood of that person converting over is quite low. Whereas in some of the other markets, like we look into LATAM, where the diversity of payment methods is a lot higher, the chance of them converting from one payment method into a different payment method means that their dropout rate seems to be slightly lower. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you may still not be offering their preferred method, and it gives that opportunity for somebody to drop out. I think for me, the number in the UK is so high because I think if I was doing my grocery shopping, for example, and saw that a debit card wasn't available and I'd got all the way through the journey of putting everything in the cart, I'd be pretty annoyed and would immediately drop out if I couldn't complete my actual shop. One of the more interesting things as well from our data suggested that people like to see their preferred payment method up front and as soon as possible in that payment journey as they can. Now, if you can stick a payment method on the home page of your site to make it clear to the customer that that payment method is offered, then they don't have that fear that if they get to the point of checkout, that's not going to be offered, and then they're going to drop out at that point. I think a lot of customers would be frustrated, and I know I'd be frustrated as a gambler myself if I created an accumulator on somebody's website and then got to the point of actually depositing my cash to actually place that bet and realized that the payment method that I wanted to use wasn't actually available. So I think that would be a real reason that I would drop out of that payment flow and probably move to a different operator. If we want to skip on to the next slide then, James. So we've talked a little bit about the importance of making sure that the preferred payment method is available to customers when it comes to them depositing. But what's the role of withdrawals? And what are the important things that come to mind for our customers when there's a withdrawal going on? Now, I know that every gambling player would probably say the reason that they gamble is to get some winnings and to make some money and to basically have a bit of fun doing it. So the important thing when it comes to actually withdrawing that cash is speed. And that's what our research suggests, is that customers value speed in withdrawing funds. Now, I know if I take my shopping analogy, for example, if I had to wait 5 days for the delivery of my shopping, I'd probably go to somebody that I know that could offer next day delivery. And the same goes for when you're looking to get your winnings back. Like Greg suggested in his previous slide, the actual odds that are offered aren't really the big differentiator or the big driver for new customers. The casual player, like myself, probably doesn't care if an accumulator is going to return an extra, £10 or £20. The important thing is that they're going to get the money back immediately because they want to be able to use that money to enjoy it, get that instant gratification, and be able to show off to their friends and buy a drink at the pub, buy a round for their winnings and stuff like that. Speed is of the essence. So we need to be talking about and looking at things like Visa Direct, instant SEPA bank outs, faster payments in the UK, and then instant banking bank out methods across the globe to make sure that speed is at the core of the withdrawal process for these customers.
Yeah, Alex, if I may just jump in here, I think
Sure.
it's a really good point. I think if you combine that with what we discussed earlier, where players have at least 2 or 3 active apps that they will use. There is choice. Retention is key here. Clearly speed is there. And as you said, the shopping analogy, switching is fairly easy. There aren't really too many barriers in doing so. It's a really valid point. Yeah,
when I was looking at this data first time around, I thought it's basically looking at me. I'm not a VIP when it comes to gambling. I have 3 or 4 apps. I often go around for what bonuses and what offers are on that day. But I know for a fact that I will use Google Pay because I've got a Google phone, and I will use the people that are going to pay me back quickly. And I know who those operators are because I've had those experiences and had those good experiences or those negative experiences, depending on which app I use. It's not difficult to switch between them. But if you want loyalty, you have to give the best customer experience ultimately. And that really does come down to speed of payments back as well.
So Alex, to your point earlier about making sure you're quite upfront about what payment methods are available, I'm guessing in terms of attraction of new punters and players, then actually your ability to pay out quickly and efficiently and being able to promote that upfront is also vitally important when it comes to player attraction, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. If I don't know as a new customer that I'm going to be able to get my funds back quick, then I'm probably going to make the assumption that I'm not going to be able to get my funds back quickly. And the expectation of the market is shifting more towards the speed of funds coming back and instant funds coming back, where it can be used as a differentiator. But ultimately, as a player, if I'm not told that I'm going to get my money back quickly, then I'm not going to know, and I'm probably going to use somebody that I know is going to give me my money back. So that's where marketing comes into it. That's where push notifications come into it, to make sure that people are aware of what you can actually offer them when it comes to the actual payment journey. And that creates loyalty, right? And that creates trust. So
Sure.
If you want to jump onto the next slide. The next thing that we looked at was people's worry around their card details being stolen. And our research suggests that this is a very real worry for a lot of customers when they're gambling. I think customers probably see paying money in and receiving money back as quite high risk, but our research suggests that fear is greater in South America than it probably is in Europe, though that doesn't mean that fear isn't there in Europe. And I suppose the thing that you've got to think about as an operator is, how do you instill that trust in your customer that they're not going to have their payment details stolen and they're not going to have any adverse effect by using your website or your mobile app? So the main thing that I would say that creates that level of trust is being able to offer a payment method that somebody is familiar with, somebody has used in the past, and somebody trusts. In the UK, most people trust their banks to look after their money. Now, that's not the same for every single market in the world. It's not so debit card heavy in different markets. So being able to know that you have a different payment method that those people have used in the past before, and that their preferred payment method is a method that they trust, is really, really important for them to trust you as an operator, and for them to build that loyalty around that trust, around that payment experience, to make sure that they come back and you have that stickiness when you're talking about retaining customers. So if we go on to the next slide. So touching on trust and security and protection, one of the big things that's in the payments industry that's going to be happening at the beginning of next year is around PSD2 and strong customer authentication and two-factor authentication that comes along with that from a compliance perspective. Now, we asked how aware people were that PSD2 was coming into place at the end of this year. And so it's quite surprising to me, to be honest, that 50% of people said that they were aware that PSD2 was coming in to force at the end of this year. I think if I asked any of my friends, they probably wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. But 50% seems quite high to me, which shows that there is engagement in the gambling market for customers, that they are aware of these sorts of things. But interestingly, the 50% number is quite high. The other part of that is 50% of people don't know. So what you've got to be thinking about as an operator is, how do you make your customers aware that there's going to be something that comes into place at the end of the year which could potentially add friction to the payment journey? Now, whether that's marketing and sending notifications out to your customers to make them aware of the changes in the actual payment experience, or whether that's putting something on your page closer to the time to say that that's actually going to be happening, could be a couple of ways of going about it. But we know that education at this point is key, because if you don't tell your customers and they're not aware that there could be a change to their payment flow in the future, as we've discussed in the preferred payment methods, this could be a potential opportunity for the customer to drop out of that transaction. And if they think that they're going to get a better payment experience by going to a different operator, well, the regulation would suggest that you shouldn't get a better experience by going to a different operator. So by educating your customer, you're making them aware that there may be a change to their payment flow, but they should stick with you because they will have that experience at a different operator as well. So really telling people is key here. The other part of our research showed that when it comes to two-factor authentication, people are really keen to actually go through that flow. They understand the benefits that it actually brings around security, and they really value security when it comes to payments. But we know from our research and speaking to operators as well, that when it actually comes down to the crunch, will those players actually value two-factor authentication at the point of placing a bet? Now, if you're placing an in-play live sport bet, in the last 20 minutes of a game when it's really tense and you're trying to get that bet placed quickly because you think something's going to happen, if you have to go through two-factor authentication and the flow is really clunky, then that's going to be a huge frustration and might make you drop out of that transaction. And it will definitely leave a memory of frustration with that app or with that website when it comes to placing a bet next time. So although customers have a willingness to go through two-factor authentication, when it comes to the actual reality of placing that bet, I think that the feeling from the customers might be very different. And I think that speaks to the importance of actually making sure that your two-factor authentication flow, for whichever payment method it might be, is really smooth and really clean. Because if it's clunky, it's going to be a pain for your customers. But if it's smooth and sleek and easy to manage and easy to understand and intuitive, then your customers are going to come back to you and continue to use you, and you're going to continue to get the benefits of the two-factor authentication. So I think what we've talked about here around preferred payment methods, trying to offer the best payment method for each market and trying to create a really local approach, and then balancing that with the need to pay back money quickly, manage risk, and be upfront with customers about which payment methods you can offer, as well as being across regulation in the market and educating your customers, should leave you in a good position to take your payments journey forward and really improve that experience for your customers and drive loyalty. James, I'll hand back to you, I think, for the
yeah, thanks. Some interesting numbers there. Quite surprising, as you said, about the awareness of two-factor authentication. That surprises me as well. I think I'm not sure all my friends would know or understand it either. So let's say there's some great insight there, I think, for operators to potentially use and maximize the opportunity to really optimize the player payment experience. I think a couple of three key takeaways for me, really, I think, to summarize, really, is really looking at enabling players to pay how they want to pay. Yeah, I think the stat that you, Greg, I think mentioned was that 27% of players actually drop out of the flow, and more importantly, move to an alternative operator, a competitor, if their payment method of choice isn't actually available. So that's a big stat, and something that really wants to be considered. So offering that payment method of choice, I think, is vital. I think the other one that I noted down was really about payouts and the speed and the efficiency of how quickly you can pay out, and the promotion of that up front, so that we can actually attract new players to the site up front. And then finally, I think, is really try and look at your business through a local lens. There isn't a cookie cutter approach. There are cultural differences within payments and player behavior. And so you really need to think about optimizing your player experience by market, and indeed sometimes by device within that as well. So I think they were my key takeaways from what you covered there, Alex and Greg. So thank you very much. So that concludes the presentation. I think we've got some time for a few questions, which I can see there's a few coming through. If I can just kick off with one here that I think leads back to something you were just talking about there, Alex, was what role do you see e-wallets playing in the gaming world post PSD2?
Yeah, I think it's played a pretty significant role even before we talk about PSD2. The role of e-wallets in the European market has been growing over the last 2, 3, 4 years. As mobile phones become more able to use those e-wallets, and as people become more familiar with them, there's been significant growth of the use of them. From our data, it shows that I think around 10 to 12% of all deposits are now through an e-wallet for gambling transactions in the UK, and that's really significant. And then when you put that in hand with the requirements around PSD2 and strong customer authentication, e-wallets are a really great solution because the payment journey is slick and smooth. You don't have to go through 3DS with that e-wallet to actually be able to get an SCA transaction. And you also get the value of loyalty that comes along with those brands as well. If you talk about Apple Pay and Google Pay, the people that are loyal with Apple phones, generally the next phone that they get is an Apple phone. They enjoy using Apple products. I know I'm using an Apple Mac right now, and I've had a lot of the products in the past, and it really does create brand loyalty. And if you're offering that same sort of brand on your website, on your gambling app, then it creates that element of loyalty to you as well as to the e-wallet itself. So I think it's really important, and I think it's gonna grow. And I think if you're not offering e-wallets, I think you really should be considering it in the future, because customers enjoy using them, like using them. The smoothness of it is easy. I use Google Pay because that's what I have as a Google phone. And I think if you're not offering them, then it can put you at a slight disadvantage, because that's what I look for when I'm looking for an operator or any sort of website that I'm going to use for a transaction.
I think the other thing to mention about e-wallets is obviously the consistent experience across different channels, right? They're an omni-channel product and provides that consistency. So, when we're talking about, putting things through apps, putting through mobile websites, and having your own website, I think that gives that experience and a consistent experience for the punters, right? I think the other thing to mention is within some of the WorldPay data that we've seen increased acceptance rates for e-wallets versus the use of cards directly, right? Certainly within the gaming world, I think some of the data I've seen suggests that there's a 9% more likelihood of an e-wallet being accepted over a credit card transaction. So there's a number of benefits, not just to the consumer experience itself, but also to the general operation for the operators.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, e-wallets are here to stay, right? And consistently growing. If you look at the global payments report that we released this year, I think we said that in terms of all e-com transactions that are going to be made via an e-wallet, it's going to rise by 10 percentage points in the next 4 years. It's huge. It's the preferred channel. There's huge benefits to the player. There's huge benefits to the operator.
Okay. Another question coming in. I could give this one to you, Greg. What's the impact of faster payments of payment of winnings, and repeat deposits?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think if you go back to the slide that I spoke about, it's all about giving players the flexibility to do what they want with the cash they've just won. If you go back to Alex's analogies, you've just won an ACCA of 20 minutes left to play, and you want to go and either take that money out, put it back on something. Operators need to give players that flexibility in order to do what they want. Faster payouts will only increase, will only have a positive effect on a more consistent deposit flow, and it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I guess. Go on. Okay, I was going to say, I guess the speed in which it comes back, as you said, it has a positive impact on the repeat deposits. But I guess then the added value of that is that it's most likely going to improve your acceptance rates on payments as a whole, right? Because the funds are going to be available next time the merchant goes for payment, right?
Yeah. We've seen insufficient funds decline, reduced, because people have money in their accounts. So when they come to make the next deposit, then they already have those funds available. So your approval rate for your sales or your deposits should actually increase by using fast withdrawals. I think the other part of it is that I think some people in the gambling industry are a little bit nervous around, allowing customers to withdraw quickly, because ultimately what you want to do as a gambling operator is have somebody win and then put that money again back into another bet. Now, if you give them the opportunity to withdraw that money instantly, then you feel like maybe there might be the opportunity that they won't come back and place another bet. But we've seen that the actual experience of giving them the ability to take that money back quickly makes them more loyal and encourages them to place a bet again in the future, because they know that when they place that bet and win, they're going to get their money back quick. If you think about, we've talked about sports betting here. If somebody places a bet on a Sunday afternoon and then there's a Champions League game on a Tuesday, if you're using an older method of paying that money back, they might have won on a Sunday and still not had their money back by a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So being able to offer them the money back instantly means that they can get that money immediately. They can have the benefit of that. They've got their gratification, the feel-good factor that comes not only with winning, but also seeing that money in your bank account. And then when you come to place that bet on a Champions League game or something like that, in the middle of the week, you're much more inclined to place that bet and redeposit, because you know that you're going to get that instant gratification at that point, and you've got the money available already.
Sure. And Alex, you mentioned obviously sporting events there, of which there's been a significant lack of in the past few months, given the recent situation with COVID. So one of the other questions coming in is, what trends and behavioural changes have we seen in this space as a result of COVID? Have there been any sort of fundamental shift in product usage and player preference?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is obviously a reduction in sports betting as the sport has ended, and generally an increase in poker, bingo, and casino. Not as significant as the reduction in sports, but people need to do something while they're locked down, and those have been things that people look to move towards. I think one of the things that's come out of the back of the lockdown has been that sports and leagues have had to then shoehorn all of these fixtures in to finish the league before the next season starts. So although there was a period of maybe six weeks or 2 months where there was no sports at all, when the sports came back, it was rapid fire and it was every single day, and that's actually led to an increase in sports betting. So it'd be interesting for me to see if that actually continues and changes some of the league's perception of televising sports, because the Premier League's traditionally not televised any of the 3 p.m. kickoffs, but obviously they're going to make more money if they're putting more games on TV. The gambling operators are certainly making more money from having more fixtures. It'd be interesting to see if that changes in the future.
Yeah,
sure.
I think that. Sorry, James. I was just going to say, I think in terms of that changing product set, or in terms of changing habits, our data from this report showed that 77% of players tried something new, bet on something different during COVID. The interesting thing is, will that cement? Will that habit stick? We've seen that the rapid rise in esports betting, relatively small volumes, but in terms of percentage, it's a huge increase. Really interesting to see how that plays out. Again, I think in terms of channel of choice, you've got an interesting debate there. You've got the heavy shift towards digital, the forced shift towards digital. Is that going to stick? There's loads in it, which obviously would make having a succinct and having a streamlined payments experience even more important. A lot of interesting ifs and whats and questions to answer it.
Greg, you mentioned esports there, and I know you've looked at esports particularly within the business in the last few months, and there's a growing trend there. Are they a different type of punter? I mean, you said they've seen an increase. We've seen an uplift in poker, casino. Those that are betting on esports, are they completely different type of punter to what we're seeing in sports betting?
Yeah, it's a good question. Interestingly, yeah, they are. So there isn't that cross cannibalization between esports betting and traditional sports betting. I think one report said that 85% of the punters who are betting on esports betting will not bet on sports betting. So it's interesting to see. So you've got that side of it. Then you've got the convergence of sports bettors who are shifting towards esports. And if you look at that through the geographical lens, in the States, you've got operators who really quickly reacted. Some DFS operators really quickly reacted to the spike in esports. And it's that nimbleness, that flexibility that is going to lead to these really rapidly growing volumes. Who knows if they're here to stay, but an interesting one nonetheless.
Yeah, so an interesting part to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I think esports is interesting because it sort of encompasses a lot of different things here. Like, I think, Greg, me and you were talking about it earlier around, the F1 being cancelled and then them playing, having leagues on video games with some of those drivers actually taking part. So you have that sort of traditional esports in terms of like somebody that's a sportsman going into an electronic site and replicating what they're doing. as an athlete or as a sportsman. But you also have the other side of it, of esports, which is like around video games and stuff like that. And when you talk about that crossover between esports bettors and traditional sports bettors, you'll get those traditional sports bettors cross over into stuff that they can associate with the things that they already know. Like, you know, if Lewis Hamilton's doing an F1 race and does it on the F1 game, that's easy to transition across to. Whereas if you're talking about League of Legends or something like that as an actual esport game, transitioning that person over into sports is going to be really difficult, and vice versa. So esports encompasses a lot, but I think there's distinctions that need to be made, and sometimes that can get a little bit confusing.
Yeah, definitely. Great point. Really good point.
Yeah, good. Okay, guys. Look, I'm just scanning through the list of questions here. I think we've got time for one more. There's a couple here around the use of and growth of cryptocurrencies within the space, and just wondering, maybe Alex, what your opinion is there, whether you think cryptocurrencies play a part in the world of gaming, tradition, I guess, particularly given that a lot of it is anonymous, right, and regarding the security aspect of things.
Yeah, I think there is an obvious benefit when it comes to the fact that it is anonymous. But I think one of the big things that holds back crypto processing, especially in the gambling space, is the volatility of the currencies themselves. A lot of people see cryptocurrencies as investments at the moment. There isn't any government that's recognizing them as a stable currency that they would regulate against. I think until we get that level of regulation around cryptocurrencies, you won't see, my opinion is, you won't see these things take off in a commercial space, whether that be gambling or whether that be any other sort of e-commerce industry. I think until the benefit of holding a cryptocurrency and just holding it and watching the price rise or fall is less, as long as there's less volatility than if you were going to place a bet. Because what you could find is that you place a bet with a Bitcoin, and then, you know, that bet has a lead time of 10 days, and in that time your Bitcoin's either tripled or doubled or quadrupled or whatever, or it's gone the other way. Like, the benefit of placing that bet is just not there. The volatility is too great for you to actually use it as a currency, in my view. But we are seeing that it's growing. We are seeing the Maltese government really try and get behind it and really encourage it. But until that volatility stabilizes, which has to come from regulation, I personally don't think that I can see it as a real big differentiator or disruptor in the payments industry. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's a good points there, Alex. Greg, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think payment methods and preferred payments method from the player perspective, it comes back to learned behaviours, right? So it's, you know, what are you doing on with e-com transactions generally, that will start to spill over into what you want to do in terms of you placing your bets. Once crypto, if it gets into the mainstream, then it will become a learned consumer behaviour. Until it gets there, I'm not sure that the player will actually want to use it, but we'll see.
Yeah. No, I think that's very fair. Very fair. Okay, cool. All right, guys. I think that brings us to the end of our time. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Thanks everybody for joining today. It's really great, interesting information there. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for joining us today. As James says, that is all we've got time for. But just a note to our audience, today's webinar has been recorded and will be available to listen to on demand shortly on igamingbusiness.com, where you can rewatch it and share with your colleagues. If you have any further questions, do feel free to reach out to us or the WorldPay team, and we'll be sure to address them as soon as possible. Otherwise, we'll see you all soon. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Jesse. Bye.
Here's
Bye-bye.
Jay-Z. Bye-bye.